5 months. In just 5 months, the biggest World Cup in history is supposed to kick off across North America. The stadiums are ready, the teams have qualified, and hundreds of thousands of fans are holding tickets. But the entire tournament has been rocked by a political firestorm. A bombshell idea has been dropped in Germany, a 4-time world champion and a titan of international football. A full-blown boycott of the 2026 World Cup. Now, the German Football Association has officially rejected the idea, stating a boycott isn't being considered. But that statement has only revealed a massive divide. This wasn't a debate about player salaries or broadcasting rights. It was the result of a shocking political standoff with the United States, a high-stakes geopolitical chess game that has suddenly trapped the world's most popular sport right in the middle. This is the story of how a German politician's threat, a public that largely agreed, and a football association's nervous rejection have exposed a deep hypocrisy in the beautiful game and challenged the very foundation of FIFA. So, how on earth did we get here? To understand this, we have to rewind, not to a locker room, but to the halls of power in Washington, D.C., and the icy shores of Greenland. The catalyst for this whole mess is the renewed and aggressive push by United States President Donald Trump to annex Greenland. Since his inauguration, President Trump has argued that bringing the massive, self-governing Danish territory under U.S. control is a matter of vital national security. This isn't some brand new idea. The U.S. has been interested in Greenland for a long time, making offers to buy it as far back as 1867 and again in 1946. During the Cold War, its strategic location was seen as critical, and the U.S. even set up military bases there. But the 21st century version of this ambition has been met with serious alarm. What used to be a diplomatic question has recently escalated into a full-blown international incident. President Trump wasn't subtle, stating he'd obtain Greenland one way or the other, and, for a time, refusing to rule out military force. This rhetoric sparked outrage, not just in Denmark, which has repeatedly said Greenland is not for sale, but across Europe. European leaders see this not as a real estate deal, but as a dangerous expansionist threat to international law. The tension was cranked up by economic threats. To add some leverage, President Trump vowed to hit several European Union states, including Germany, with steep tariffs of around 10%, starting from February 1st. He later walked back that specific threat after a meeting at the World Economic Forum in Davos, but the damage was done. In Berlin, the move was seen as an act of economic coercion, a hostile gesture from a supposed ally. The talks at Davos were reportedly tense, with European leaders feeling they were defending the global order against American aggression. This powder keg of geopolitics, history, and economic hardball was just sitting there, waiting for a match. The idea of a World Cup boycott didn't come from the German Football Association, the DFB. It came straight from Germany's political heart. The first and loudest voice to weaponize the World Cup was Jürgen Hart. Hart is no fringe figure. He's a senior politician in the Christian Democratic Union, CDU, and serves as the foreign policy spokesperson for his parliamentary group. In other words, when he talks about foreign relations, people listen. In a bombshell interview with the German tabloid Bild on January 22, 2026, Hart said the unthinkable. He stated that if the United States were to go ahead with what he called an illegal annexation of Greenland, he couldn't imagine a joyful football celebration happening in the U.S. He framed a potential boycott as a last resort to get Trump to see sense, pointing out that Trump himself had made it clear how important hosting the World Cup was to him. The tournament was a point of maximum leverage. And Hart wasn't just a lone voice. His colleague, Roderick Kiesewetter, echoed the sentiment, saying that if Trump starts a trade war with the EU over Greenland, it's hard to imagine European countries taking part in the World Cup. These were calculated political statements designed to send a clear message to Washington. Hart was essentially holding Germany's participation hostage to force a diplomatic retreat, and the public reaction in Germany was immediate and astonishing. A poll cited by Bild revealed a startling figure. 47% of the German public would support boycotting the World Cup if the U.S. annexed Greenland. With only 35% opposed, it was clear Hart had tapped into a deep well of public frustration. This wasn't just a politician's idea anymore. It was a mainstream national debate. And suddenly, the DFB found itself caught in a political storm it couldn't ignore. Jürgen Hart's political grenade had landed, and the shockwaves quickly spread to the world of German football. The figure who picked it up and amplified the call was one of the most interesting voices in the sport, Oke Güttlich. Güttlich is the president of FC St. Pauli, a Hamburg-based club famous around the world for its unique identity. St. Pauli is proudly left-wing, with a culture built on anti-fascism, anti-racism, and social justice. Their fans are known for political activism, and the club's skull and crossbones flag is a global symbol of anti-establishment values. But Güttlich is more than a club president. As a member of the DFB's presidential board, he has a foot in both the radical activist world of St. Pauli and the powerful bureaucracy of Germany's national governing body. Speaking to a local newspaper, Güttlich forcefully urged for a serious discussion about a boycott. He directly called out the hypocrisy he saw in the football world. The 2022 World Cup in Qatar was too political for everyone, and now we're completely apolitical? That really bothers me, he said, referencing the heated debates over human rights that surrounded the last tournament. He then drew a powerful historical parallel. What were the justifications for the boycotts of the Olympic Games in the 1980s? He asked. By my reckoning, the potential threat is greater now than it was then. This was a deliberate comparison to the 1980 Moscow Olympics, which the U.S. boycotted over the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Güttlich was arguing that the current U.S. actions were a comparable violation of international norms. The pressure wasn't just coming from executives. It began to seep into the national team dressing room. Leon Goretzka, a key midfielder for Bayern Munich and Germany, gave a subtle but telling comment. Amid the boycott calls, he remarked that recent political events made him and his teammates feel not only German, but also European, a clear diplomatic signal of solidarity with the broader European position. The momentum was building. Petitions began to circulate, with one in the Netherlands gathering over 135,000 signatures. The German boycott call was no longer a fringe idea. It had a political champion, an institutional advocate, public support, and the quiet backing of at least some players. The DFB leadership was now in an impossible position. Before we get into how FIFA and the German Football Association officially responded to this mess, if you're finding this story insightful, make sure to subscribe. We go deep on the stories where sports and politics collide, and your support helps us keep digging. As the boycott debate raged, the leadership of the German Football Association, the DFB, was forced to respond. The DFB is the single largest sports federation on the planet, a massive and complex organization. it was now facing immense external pressure and a serious internal split. On one side was board member Oke Göttlich. On the other was the DFB's top brass, President Bernd Neuendorf and Hans-Joachim Watzke, the influential head of the professional leagues. Their first reaction was to try and shut the conversation down. Neuendorf described Göttlich's call for a boycott discussion as misguided and stressed it was a personal opinion, not the official stance of the Federation. They clung to the age-old argument that sport and politics should be separate. This tension led to an official DFB statement on January 31st. It was a masterclass in trying to please everyone. It began with a clear jab at Göttlich, stating, "The DFB Presidential Board is united in its view that debates around political and sporting matters should be conducted internally rather than in public." Then came the official line, "A boycott of the 2026 World Cup is not currently being considered." The statement went on to talk about the unifying power of sport. But this rejection did little to quiet the debate. If anything, it just highlighted the chasm between the DFB's leadership and the public mood. Worse, the DFB's argument for keeping politics out of sport was immediately attacked as hypocritical. Critics, led by Göttlich, were quick to point out the DFB's very vocal and political stance on human rights ahead of the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. Germany had been at the forefront of those protests, with players even covering their mouths for a team photo to symbolize being silenced by FIFA. The question was sharp and unavoidable. Why was it noble to protest for human rights in Qatar, but misguided to protest against threats to international law from the United States? This perceived double standard made the DFB leadership look weak and fueled accusations that their decision was based not on principle, but on fear of angering a powerful host nation. With German politicians openly floating a boycott and the nation's football association publicly divided, the crisis landed squarely on FIFA's doorstep in Zurich. For FIFA and its president, Gianni Infantino, the situation was a diplomatic and financial nightmare. The World Cup is FIFA's cash cow. It funds almost everything the organization does. The absence of a team like Germany, a four-time champion and a ratings giant, would be a catastrophic financial blow from broadcasting rights, sponsorships, and ticket sales. But for Infantino, the problem was more than just money. It was personal. Infantino has nurtured a very close relationship with Donald Trump, even recently awarding him a FIFA Peace Prize in a widely criticized move. He has championed the North American World Cup as a cornerstone of his legacy. Now, that legacy was being threatened by a crisis directly involving his closest political ally. This put Infantino in an impossible bind. FIFA's own rules, specifically Article 15 of its statutes, demand that member associations avoid any form of political interference. Technically, the calls from German politicians could be seen as exactly that. In the past, FIFA has suspended entire nations for far less. He could, in theory, threaten to suspend Germany. But doing that to a football superpower like Germany would be an insane risk. It could fracture European football and potentially destroy FIFA itself. On the other hand, if Infantino did nothing, he'd risk the boycott idea gaining more traction and becoming a reality. If Germany were to pull out, or be forced to by political pressure, it could trigger a domino effect. The idea was already echoing in other European nations. Commentator Piers Morgan had even floated the idea of a unified boycott by England, France, Spain, and Italy. The thought of a European bloc standing against the U.S. host was no longer a wild fantasy. This left Infantino with no good options, trapped in a political crisis of the highest order. To really get the magnitude of this situation, you have to look at the history of sporting boycotts. They're rare, but their ghosts haunt both FIFA and the Olympics. The most famous example is the 1980 Moscow Olympics, which Oka Gutlich directly referenced. After the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, U.S. President Jimmy Carter delivered an ultimatum: pull out or face a boycott. The Soviets didn't, and the U.S. and 64 other nations, including West Germany and Japan, stayed home. The boycott devastated the Games, delegitimized the results, and created lasting bitterness. It also triggered a revenge boycott 4 years later, when the Soviet bloc skipped the Los Angeles Olympics. Most historians now agree the boycott did very little politically, while causing immense damage to the world of sport. The World Cup has its own history of politically motivated absences. The first ever champions, Uruguay, refused to defend their title in 1934 to protest European teams snubbing their tournament 4 years earlier. In 1966, the entire continent of Africa boycotted the World Cup in England to protest an unfair qualification system. And it worked. FIFA gave Africa a guaranteed spot for the next tournament. But the 2026 situation is different. This isn't a Cold War rivalry or smaller nations protesting rules. This is the idea of one major Western power and historical ally boycotting a tournament hosted by another. It's a family feud. And today's World Cup is a commercial monster on a scale unimaginable back then. The financial stakes for FIFA, broadcasters, and sponsors are exponentially higher. A German boycott in 2026 would cause financial damage far beyond any previous World Cup boycott. The precedents show that boycotts are a messy, unpredictable tool. But the fact that they've happened before is exactly what made this threat so real. The reason this boycott idea caused such a panic is that if Germany were ever forced to follow through on it, the consequences would be seismic. First, the tournament itself would be fundamentally devalued. You can't have the biggest World Cup ever if one of the best teams in history isn't there. Any nation that won the trophy would see their victory forever tainted by an asterisk. Second, and most terrifying for FIFA, is the domino effect. If a European leader like Germany were to withdraw, it would place immense pressure on other nations to follow. Imagine France, where politicians have also raised the idea, deciding to join. What about the Netherlands, where that public petition gained so much steam? A unified European boycott would turn the World Cup from a global celebration into a politically fractured, second-rate event. While government officials in countries like France have publicly opposed a boycott, that position could become very difficult to hold if a major partner like Germany pulls out. Third, the financial fallout would be calamitous. Broadcasters in Germany would demand massive rebates. Global sponsors would see the value of their investment plummet. The economic projections for host cities counting on tourism would have to be torn up. A study of the 2006 World Cup showed it boosted Germany's GDP by billions. Removing German fans, and potentially other European fans, from the 2026 equation would create a massive economic hole. Finally, it would force a crisis within FIFA that could threaten its very existence. A hardline stance against Germany could lead to an open rebellion from UEFA, the powerful European Confederation. It could lead to the once unthinkable, a breakaway organization and a rival World Cup, splitting the football world in two. The threat wasn't just about one team sitting out. It was about the potential for the entire ecosystem of international football to unravel. We stand at a crossroads, just 5 months from a World Cup that is now defined by a political crisis. The debate in Germany over a potential boycott has exposed the fragile fault lines just beneath the surface of international sport. It has revealed how quickly the ideals of global unity can be swept aside by geopolitics. The German Football Association, despite officially rejecting a boycott, remains in a tough spot. With nearly half the German public supporting the move and senior politicians championing it, the DFB's position looks weak. Their argument for separating sport and politics rings hollow to many who see a glaring double standard compared to the activism surrounding the 2022 Qatar World Cup. Meanwhile, FIFA President Gianni Infantino is trapped between his loyalty to a key political ally in Donald Trump and his duty to protect his organization. Any move he makes is fraught with peril. The situation has become a high-stakes game of chicken. Will the political pressure in Germany force the DFB to reconsider? Will the U.S. administration do anything to de-escalate? This crisis forces us to confront a question the sporting world has long tried to avoid. We're always told that sports and politics shouldn't mix. But what happens when politics refuses to stay on the sidelines? What happens when a host nation's actions are so provocative that just showing up feels like an endorsement? There are no easy answers. The only certainty is that this affair has revealed a deep conflict at the heart of the world's game, one that isn't going away anytime soon.